If you've been riding motorcycles for a while, you're probably like me in the way that you've owned and sold quite a few bikes. It's almost guaranteed that the first bike you buy won't be your last. When I bought my first bike, it was pretty tough to decide which one I thought would be the best one to start on. Having never ridden a motorcycle before, I wanted to make sure my first bike was going to be something I was comfortable learning on. Of course, I had the major considerations in mind when shopping around. Price, style, reliability, and aftermarket support all played a role in me making my decision. After weeks and weeks of watching YouTube videos and comparing a lot of bikes to each other, I decided to buy the Kawasaki Ninja 300. At the time, it was a very popular bike. It was beginner friendly, had a good aftermarket support for bolt-on parts, it was very reliable, being a Japanese bike, and was really affordable at right around $5,000 brand new. There were a lot of people talking about this bike when it was released, and it had a pretty good following. When I was doing my research, there was a lot of videos on YouTube talking about it, which was cool because who wants to buy a beginner bike that nobody talks about? Anyway, fast forward about 6 months after I bought the bike and had several hundred miles of riding under my belt, the shortcomings of that little Ninja were becoming pretty noticeable. First of all, the overall comfort of riding the bike. I'm a bigger guy, and that Ninja is pretty small. But I knew when I started riding, I wanted a bike I felt like I could easily handle, and it met that requirement. What I didn't realize was how uncomfortable the bike would be after only being on it for about a half an hour. Second, it's a quote-unquote sport bike, which at the time of me buying it is what I thought was going to be the type of rider I wanted to be, a sport bike rider. Sport bikes are cool looking, handle great in corners, they brake awesome, and let's be honest, sport bike riding gear is really cool looking. And I wanted to look cool while riding my bike. But let's be honest here, looking cool on your bike is pretty important to a lot of people. And at the time, it was important to me. The lack of power didn't bother me, nor did the looks. Matter of fact, I thought those were both pretty good. It was the seating position and the seat that made it so I couldn't ride it for very long. And I wanted something more comfortable. Not being able to ride for hours and hours was a deal breaker for me. It was time to get myself a different bike, so I traded it in. Most of us, at one point or another, have bought the wrong bike. So, do I regret getting rid of that little Ninja 300? No. It's not on the list of bikes I regret getting rid of, except for maybe a little nostalgia related to it because it was my first motorcycle. But otherwise, no. However, sometimes you buy a bike that, despite its flaws, the moment you trade it off or sell it, you instantly regret it. Here's a short list of motorcycles that I've owned that I regret getting rid of. The first bike, my Kawasaki Vulcan S. It was my first cruiser-style motorcycle and the bike that I traded my Ninja 300 for. I remember the day I brought it home from the dealership. I was really nervous the first time I rode it. I took the long way home on that bike. Neighborhood streets with low speed limits and little to no traffic because I was honestly afraid I was going to drop it. And I didn't want a bunch of people see me drop a brand new bike, so back roads lowered the odds of my potential embarrassment. When I got that Vulcan, it was the only bike I had ridden other than my Ninja in the little dual sport at the MSF training school. That Vulcan felt really weird to me pulling out of the dealership parking lot. But after riding around for a couple hours, it started to feel really natural to me. The controls were set up nicely and felt very intuitive. The extra power wasn't as hard to control like I feared it would be, and it handled like a dream. The center of gravity was nice and low, the tires were sticky. I felt confident cornering and braking on it, and most of all, the seating position was 1,000 times better than my Ninja 300. I learned how to ride in the rain on that Vulcan after getting stuck in a thunderstorm on my way back from a trip up north with a couple of friends. The bike was only a couple days old and had brand new tires with only 100 miles on them. The bike was very sure-footed and never once made me feel like I was going to lose control. I couldn't tell the difference in handling from dry to wet pavement, and trust me, it was pouring down rain. The Vulcan was an awesome bike. It did everything I asked of it and never made me feel like it should be better. It was nimble, it was fast, it looked good, and I had a lot of great riding experiences on it. I miss that bike, and I regret trading it in. The next bike is my little Honda Grom. Ah yes, the little Honda Grom. the bike that started an entire culture of mini bike riders. Arguably, one of the best and most influential motorcycles produced in the last 20 years, the Honda Grom took the USA by storm with its size, low cost, and how easy it was to ride by almost anybody, whether or not you've ever ridden a motorcycle. It was, and still is, a badass motorcycle. It was in fact the bike that sparked my interest in riding motorcycles. Even though the Grom wasn't my first bike, it's the one that made me get into riding bikes, and is the one that I miss the most of all of them. Mine was the 2018 model year, pearl white in color, and in my opinion was the best looking Grom made by far. Better looking than the original design, and better than the one that's currently being sold. I had some trouble even finding one for sale locally. The Honda dealership here is a small family business with limited inventory, so a guy has to time it just right when looking for a particular model, and the Grom was no exception. Forget about finding a clean one on the used market. I haven't looked lately, but at the time, nobody was listing them for sale. People tend to hang on to these little bikes because they're so much fun to own. I actually gave up on buying one for a while and ended up buying the Kawasaki competitor, the Z125 Pro. It was a fun little bike. I put a lot of modifications on it to make my own, and it looked really cool when I was done with it, but it wasn't a Grom. More on that Z125 Pro later. I could never get that little Grom out of my head. Luckily, I did eventually find one at my local dealership and bought it. To my surprise, it didn't need anything to be perfect. All I did to it was tidy up the turn signals to give them a cleaner look and slap a set of bar-in mirrors on it. I did change out the front sprocket, but that didn't need to be done. It was fine with stock gearing. For what it was, that little bike in stock form was just about perfect. That Grom was so fun to ride. They're so small and light, you never have to worry about getting stuck somewhere, where to park, or if you're gonna piss off Karen by riding down a sidewalk on one. I've done it. Nobody cares. They look like a toy and people love them. When you ride a Grom, it's one of the most fun experiences you can have on a bike. I don't care how old or young you may be, they're fun, they're goofy, they're cute, and there's nothing like owning one. And I really miss my little Honda Grom. So now, let me talk about my Honda Shadow 600. Mine was a 1996 model. Nothing special about it when I bought it used for $1,800. At the time, I was looking for a bike I could build into a bobber-style motorcycle. The Shadow had everything I was looking for. It was a cruiser, it had a lot of aftermarket parts available for it, both bolt-on and custom. It was lightweight, and from all the pictures I could dig up online, it looked sick when chopped up and made into a bobber. Not to mention, it's a Honda, so I felt like it would be reliable. I didn't want something that would need a lot of mechanical attention to keep it on the road. I wanted a bobber that I could just jump on and ride without worrying about it breaking down on me. It was my first attempt at building a bike that actually required more than just bolting on parts I ordered from the internet. But it's not like I'm a complete noob when it comes to getting my hands dirty. I've owned and worked on dozens of classic cars in the past, so building the Shadow into a bobber wasn't going to be too much of a challenge for me. I had a vision of what I wanted it to look like, so I set out to gather up the parts I would need to create a bobber of my own. I ordered some white wall tires for it, a bobber kit from a company called Blue Collar Bobbers, and a few other parts and pieces sorted from various websites. I had to fabricate a few pieces for the build myself, like turn signal mounts, but other than that, I was able to order everything I needed. It didn't take me long to put it all together, and when it was done, I was pretty proud of how it turned out. Although the color I painted it wasn't my first choice, it was just what I had on hand. But still, it looked good after it was done. I left the factory exhaust on it and drilled out the baffles so it had that nice V-twin sound. I really liked riding it. It wasn't fast by any measure, and it didn't do highways very well, but it sure as hell made me feel good on it, and it got a lot of attention from other people when I took it out. It's got a place among these bikes that I regret selling. So now, let's talk about that little Kawasaki Z125 Pro I mentioned earlier. This is the bike I bought when I couldn't find a Grom for sale anywhere. Admittedly, buying this bike was a spur-of-the-moment decision. I wasn't really thinking about buying it before I saw it on the showroom floor while wandering around wasting time one day after work, but I had watched a few videos about it before, so I knew what I was buying. I guess it was either buy the Z25 and have a mini bike, or don't, and not have one at all. The Kawasaki Minimoto does have some advantages over the Grom, like a better instrument cluster, larger fuel tank, and an external oil filter, just to name a few. Having owned both of them, I can say from experience the Z125 is easier to work on, but I'm basing that on the second generation Grom, not the newest model, so things may have changed. After I bought the Z, I went all in on customizing it to my liking. I bought new tires for it, I bought a lowering kit, swing arm stretch kit, drop handlebars, new exhaust, air filter, a tuner, a Corbin seat. I mean, come on, who buys a $500 seat for a mini bike? I mean, the list goes on. I had a lot of fun modding that bike. I spent a lot of time and money on it. I was always tuning it and trying different parts to make it go faster. But despite all the time and money spent, I never could squeeze much more speed out of it. Sure, I could have bought more parts to get it to go faster, but I wasn't willing to spend another couple grand just to get a few more miles per hour. To me, it wasn't a bike I was too interested in at first, but the longer I owned it and rode it, the more it grew on me. It had a cool look, and it rode like nothing else I've owned after all the mods I did to it. It was fun to think about a 40-something-year-old guy riding around on a stretched, lowered mini bike. It's kind of silly looking back on it, but I didn't care what others may have thought about that. I was having fun with it. It's one of those bikes that went in on a trade for a different one. Of course, when you trade in a bike at a dealership, you always get screwed, and I got screwed on that one, big time. The amount of money I had in that Z compared to what they gave me isn't something I'm proud to admit here, and it still stings thinking about it. I should have kept it, and I regret getting rid of it. To close out this video, I just wanted to say, you're not alone if you've ever regretted selling a bike. I have the same regrets. Now, I try not to get attached to personal possessions, motorcycles or otherwise, but every once in a while you buy a bike that just does something to you. Whether it's the riding experience that it gives you, or it's just a bike that you like to work on. Sometimes motorcycles can touch on something inside you, and they connect to a part of you without you even knowing it at the time. Sometimes you don't even realize how much you like a certain motorcycle until you no longer have it. I don't even have the words to describe what I'm trying to say here, but that's okay, because you know what I'm talking about. Thanks for watching.